Them superpowers get neutralized, I can only watch in silence. The famous actor we once knew is looking paranoid and now spiraling. Calculate, you're not as calculated. I can even predict your angles. A pathetic master manipulator, I can smell the tails on you now. You're not a rap artist, you're a scam artist with the hopes of being accepted. I make music that electrify 'em, you make music that pacify 'em. I can double down on that line, but spare you this time. There's random acts of kindness. Know you're a master manipulator and habitual liar too. But don't tell no lie about me, and I won't tell truths about you. Shoo, 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 shoo. Beep, 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 beep.
Dark Souls sucks. This idea that Dark Souls is every game has reached its limit for me. This is a Souls-like. That is a Souls-like. Your mom rolls out of my bed in the morning, so she's a Souls-like. The Souls-like genre is a term that has spread like a virus and has attached itself to anything with a checkpoint system and a roll mechanic. Pretty soon, Metroid Prime 4 is going to come out and people will most likely call it a Souls-like. Not everything is Dark Souls. Hell, Dark Souls can't even beat Dark Souls since none of the games are like the first one. In my opinion, Dark Souls 1 is the only good Dark Souls game in the series to me. All of the other games are lesser versions of it or an imitation of something else. Now don't get me wrong, so is Dark Souls, but how everything was put together was immaculate. People were hooked from that first game and haven't been able to let go since. It's so bad that now when I look up a review or a retrospective of a video game, the immediate comparisons is Dark Souls, even when there isn't a hint of Dark Souls in sight. It's just a lazy comparison most of the time. This has stopped me from playing some really good games. Look, my goal today is to quell this myth that Dark Souls is a god tier game that everyone needs to strive to be like. We'll get into that a little more, but I have to state my case first. So let me build up this legendary game so I can tear it down and show to you all that it's just a game. Nothing more, nothing less. And the fact that you like the game doesn't make any other game bad because it's not Dark Souls. So I got a few things I want to say that I think will get my point across. You don't have to agree or disagree. I just feel like these thoughts need to be in the ether. I already touched on a few of them, so let's start with my first point. Number 1, I love Dark Souls. Look, I told you I was going to build up the game first. Give it all the confidence in the world to have me feeling invincible, just so I can Spartan kick it into the Shadow Realm. Dark Souls is a great game with captivating visuals and a great sense of discovery. The visual design is top notch. Every area is visually distinct, so no matter where you are, you never get lost, which is great since there isn't a map. The enemy variety is vast. The game is great at throwing a lot of different enemies at you with their own movesets and abilities. Bosses are big and rambunctious, taking up most of the screen sometimes with how gargantuan they are. They are memorable because of their designs and the frustration it takes to beat them. Everyone has that one Dark Souls boss that has their number. These are good aspects of the game, but the greatest thing about the game is the structure. The way the game is structured is amazing. Dark Souls starts by putting you in the Undead Asylum. This area is a tutorial stage that helps you get a sense of the mechanics and the feel of the world. You're also going to get bodied by the first boss. It's a great demo for the game to let you see if you really want to get into this. If you decide that you do want to smoke, a giant bird escorts you to the Firelink Shrine. When you get to the Firelink Shrine, you are presented with choices. There are 3 ways to go that get presented to you. 5 actually, if you know, you know. Lower New London, Undead Burg, or the Catacombs are your default choices. And the more you know about the game, the more you can take advantage of these paths and others. Arriving for the first time, you are greeted with a bonfire and a curious man who has some advice on where to go from the start. He tells you about a couple bells that need to get rung, and that's it. You're on your way. Again, if this is your first playthrough, it is super confusing on where to go and what to do. But if you played a game before, you just follow the basics. Follow the enemies. All of this wrapped up in a Metroid-like game makes this a great experience. This is always a great structure for any kind of game, and Dark Souls is great at taking this and using it to perfection. Even though Dark Souls does some things great, there are things it does terribly, which moves me to my next point. Number 2, everything about Dark Souls isn't great. I know, shocker, right? The great and almighty Dark Souls doesn't do everything to perfection. It has flaws like anything else that was made in this world. It's cool though. I can't think of any game doing everything it wants to do to perfection. But the things that are bad about Dark Souls are teetering on crimes against humanity. Some of this shit is atrocious and will make some people just give up completely on the game before they even started. One of those hurdles you have to jump over is combat. Combat in Dark Souls is terrible, straight up. It's heavy, it's clunky, it's slower than the girl you are trying to clap replying back to you. There are very few options for defense, and there is hardly any back and forth between you and your opponent. You're either the one shooting them, or you're getting shot. Skill is not a factor when it comes to defeating opponents. It's more of a numbers game. There is no combat strategy for bosses, and no, rolling is not a strategy. The coolest defensive move you can do is a parry, and that is also lackluster. Granted, it's not an action game or sold to you as such, but you get these people saying it's actually good combat and these goofy ass game companies using that terrible button scheme on action games. I'm looking at you, God of War. I'll talk more about that later. Since the combat is so bad, people think the game is difficult. Dark Souls is not difficult. Dark Souls preys on the fact that you don't know what the hell is going on. You don't know what's behind the next corner, and the game wants you to be at this alert paranoia the whole time. The fact that you don't know doesn't make something hard or difficult. Dark Souls isn't trying to be difficult. It wants to be unfair. You think the bed of chaos is difficult? No, but it's some bullshit and one of those crimes against humanity I was talking about. I always describe this game like what if an NPC had to fight the main character? The game is displaying that with the story, the gameplay, and the unfairness. The story barely acknowledges that you exist, telling this epic about all these other characters having this great war, and then at the end they talk about some flame that needs to be lit. It's treated as insignificant because that's how the world feels about the player. I get it, you don't understand what's going on because the story is mad confusing. There are YouTube channels, plural, that are dedicated to telling you what's actually going on in these games. But unconventional storytelling isn't anything new. There's a lot of things in Dark Souls that aren't new. It wears its inspiration on its sleeves and uses games and ideas that came before them to their advantage. It seems people don't know this, but there were games before Dark Souls. Those games already did what Dark Souls wanted to do first. There are two games in particular that I want to talk about that I think Dark Souls is molded after. Honestly, two of the greatest games that ever gamed in my opinion. Number 3, The Fusion Days. Dark Souls is born. Like I said, Dark Souls wears influences on his sleeve, and that's totally fine. Miyazaki himself said he wanted to make a game that was reminiscent of games of old. One of those old ass games that I think has a stranglehold on Dark Souls is The Legend of Zelda. The Legend of Zelda to me is one of the greatest games of all time. If you don't know, The Legend of Zelda is about the eternal fight for the Triforce between Zelda and Ganon. Since it's 1986, they can't show you this gorgeously made cutscene, so you get a little text in the beginning telling you how Ganon ran up on Zelda and told her to run the jewels. Zelda doesn't want to give up her piece of the Triforce, so she breaks it into 8 units and scatters them across the earth like the Dragon Balls after her wish was made. Then they bring up Link in the last 2 sentences and tell him to save the princess, save the world. If you look up the manual like the end of the scroll tells you to, you see that Zelda doesn't even know who Link was at all. She just told Impa to find someone with enough courage to do the job. Impa was randomly saved by Link, and she figured he was brave enough to throw hands with Ganon. She told him about the 8 units and he ran his happy ass off to go find it. The game starts you off with absolutely nothing, and you just have to go figure it out. The people you do find give you helpful tips and sometimes helpful items, but most of the time you're left in the dark. You conquer all the dungeons, collect all 8 units, and fight Ganon to free Princess Zelda and save Hyrule. Seems like a basic setup for a hero's tale now, but at the time you never seen it done like this on this medium. But it's that one detail that Dark Souls uses that makes me feel like The Legend of Zelda has Dark Souls in a nostalgic chokehold, making the player character seem insignificant. Again, in Dark Souls, your character is the most insignificant person in that whole story. You're treated like an afterthought. The whole game is like this, and even when you do something epic, nobody's enthused, and everybody moves on with their digitally programmed lives. Link is essentially a background character in his story. Unlike other games where you are the chosen one, you are the shepherd to lead us to greener pasture, You're the reason things are happening, and this game wouldn't be made without this particular character existing. There's a reason for this though. The player character is supposed to be the link between you and the world you're interacting with. And yes, I said that, admit that unironically. As a person, you are being thrust into a world where you have no clue what's going on other than what you are told and actually what you listen to, which is the start to getting you into the game and immersing you in the world that was made. By putting you and the player character on even ground, you feel more attached to the character and your progress. You and this character are figuring it all out together, and now when you make progress or defeat a boss, there's a great sense of elation. You both did it. Also, the Moonlight Greatsword is the Master Sword, just had to throw that in there. Now, Dark Souls mostly plays like Zelda, but from a general sense, what made Dark Souls so great to me was the structure of the game. Now I get to talk about Metroid. Metroid is the greatest video game of all time. And yes, I'm saying that as a statement, not an opinion. They are still making Metroids and Metroid-like games to this day. That shit been hitting since 1986. And while we're at it, get that term Metroidvania out of here. Castlevania didn't start doing the Metroid thing until Symphony of the Night, which was on PlayStation. How you steal somebody's swag and get half the credit? Oh yeah, Dark Souls. Now instead of structuring the game like The Legend of Zelda, they went the Metroid route. Again, starting you at the Firelink Shrine and giving you choices on how you want to progress. Metroid stars Samus and Brinstar on the planet Zeebs and is sent on her merry way. Again, there's a set path to go, but if you have prior knowledge, you can sequence break and use what you know to your advantage. Everything is broken up into these zones. They are themed and have a boss at the end to signal you are finished with the area for them. Once a zone's boss is beaten though, doesn't mean the zone is finished. Later in the game, you will gain knowledge and get abilities to help you get better items for your playthrough. Coming back to these zones, you get these items that could be critical to you later on. As you go from zone to zone, you will come across checkpoints to establish a safe haven within the area. Here at these checkpoints, you will be able to restock on supplies and heal yourself fully. Once you get these checkpoints, enemies respawn in the immediate area, making these a risk-reward factor of the game. Once you've acquired a specific item, done a specific task, or beat a specific boss, you are free to progress however you want through the game. Having more knowledge of what's going on in the world makes each playthrough that much more satisfying and enjoyable. Knowing what's behind the corner puts you at ease, and now you can focus on getting all the items you can to make you better prepared for the fights that matter. Now, which game was I talking about? Both of them. Miyazaki loves the games from before and he puts that on full display. Again, this is what makes Dark Souls so good to me. To be able to have that formula in a medieval fantasy game was the best idea. It works then and it works now. That is what makes Dark Souls so good to me. The inspiration, the structure, and the gameplay revolving around all of that. The way everything was put together was immaculate. Like I said, in my opinion, there hasn't been a Souls-like in the franchise that has been able to top it. And yes, I'm including Elden Ring a little bit, but I haven't really gotten into it yet. And now, that's how we move on to the next point. Number 4, there's only one Dark Souls. The franchise as a whole has been mediocre in my opinion. Nothing has been able to give me that same feeling that Dark Souls has. 2 and 3 are linear, so is Bloodborne and Sekiro, but at least those games have interesting weapons and abilities to them. Also some cool aesthetics, but they don't hit me like that Dark Souls 1. Everything about Dark Souls is what makes Dark Souls good. The mechanics, the story, the systems, the gameplay, and the structure. All those tiny pieces coming together is what makes the Dark Souls experience. And that's very important. You need all of these parts to make Dark Souls what it is. When you take away parts, you get a different experience. This brings up a big point I wanted to get into more detail later. And that point is that you don't know why you like Dark Souls. I really have to wait till later to get more into this. Let's talk about Dark Souls 2 instead. To me, from the jump, Dark Souls 2 didn't get what Dark Souls was. The story is all about you, and you are the reason the story exists, and this world wouldn't live without you. Yeah, from the start, they went a different direction. The story is told in a linear way. You go from being isekai from life to being thrusted smack dab in the middle of the game. You see the house where the witch ate Hansel and Gretel in the distance, and you make your way there. The witches tell you everything you need to do and what's going on at the moment. It's also told to you in a Gears of War cutscene, which is so Dark Souls, right? After all of this, You finally get to make your character. This is frustrating as fuck. Everything about this feels like it came out in 2008. It didn't though. It came out in 2014. I get Miyazaki didn't direct this game, but again, from the start, it seems like Yui Tanimura didn't understand what Dark Souls was. Almost like he didn't understand the metaphors that Dark Souls was laying down. Yes, there are systems, mechanics, and gameplay from Dark Souls, but it's missing a lot of key components. Structure is the biggest one. Again, it's a linear game. Point A to point B with some shit in between. You start in the Betwixt, which is an optional tutorial area. I get you have a built-in audience from the first one, but let's not act like Dark Souls 1 was this worldwide phenomenon when it only sold 2.4 million in 18 months. Make this area more memorable and required so you can figure out how to play Dark Souls 2. This is like the third misstep in the first 30 minutes of the game. Yeah, this game got me Betwixt. You go from being Betwixt to a place called Majula. This is the hub area of your undead. You'll slowly unlock all the necessary components to help you along your journey. You got your blacksmith, your resident sad knight who is in a covenant, and a cat who gets you out of there. Also, we meet the Emerald Herald, the main maiden of the game. Here is where we get to the most egregious part. This lady is the only place where you can level up. How did this happen? We get the fast travel from the beginning, and now I'm relegated to bringing my ass back here every time I want to level up. This is a thing taken from Demon Souls, the Maiden in Black. She is found in the Nexus, a hub area. This makes sense for Demon Souls because of how it's structured. The Nexus is where the game takes place. It's how you level up, buy items, upgrade weapons, and enter new worlds. It's almost in a way like Mario 64 where the castle is the hub and you go through the doors to enter a new world. Or even a medieval Mega Man. This works for the game because of how it's structured. This is super annoying here. Time wasting and a step backwards literally. Dark Souls already solved this problem, but you don't get to use the bonfire to level up again until Elden Ring. What's going on here? They are a little too fond of these maidens, and they are holding up progress. Another thing about Dark Souls 2 people herald are the bosses. Okay, that's cool, but where are they though? The first boss I finally got to fight was the Last Giant. This is the most underwhelming boss fight I have ever fought. It takes like 2 to 3 hours to get to him, and after all that, he has a basic ass move list and an OVO4 face. He even died late. This is what people are hyping up to be an actually good game? I don't even think this is decent at the moment. This game is very frustrating and not pretty at all. Looks like everything was smeared with Vaseline and vacuum dust. Just nasty looking. Every door is locked or doesn't open from this side, turning this into Doom and the hunt for the colored keys. I mean, if you like it, that's cool, but I'm not a fan, I guess. FromSoft can take this back. Sekiro and Bloodborne are using mechanics and systems from the Dark Souls games, but they are completely different experiences. Bloodborne has a cool environment and a great idea for weapons. Being able to utilize a weapon multiple ways is really useful, and that is something I would like to see more in games. The closest thing I could think of is Nioh with its stances. If you like the atmosphere, a gothic setting, and werewolves, you should be in for a good time. The combat for me is okay, giving you a few more options for defense and a gun, but combat isn't FromSoft's strong suit, so it's just okay. Yeah, it's faster, but what does that really mean with FromSoft's combat? Faster PS1 combat? I guess if that's what you want, go ahead. Sekiro has a fantasy feudal Japan aesthetic set in the Sengoku era. In this game, they just throw the character creator out the window and they make the character for you. His name is Wolf, or Sekiro. He has one hand and a plan to save the boy so he can grow to be a man. His other hand is prosthetic that you can attach different tools to for different abilities. Also, the best thing about this hand is that you can use it as a grappling hook to get to higher places and get an advantage over your opponents, or to proceed to the next area. It has creative looking bosses and some cool animation. The big feature in Sekiro is the parry. They want you to parry the enemies to break down their posture. This gives you two options to kill an enemy. hit them enough to deplete their life, or parry for your life and break down the posture bar to get an instant kill. This is a take on the key bar from Neo, except you get the option to kill from the posture bar. These are good games, and we're not looking to be a Dark Souls game at all. They have their own identities, and I look at them as their own thing, a grace I wish other games would get. That's kind of one of the reasons I'm making this video. Then you got Miyazaki back again to make his follow-up to Dark Souls. Dark Souls 3 came out in 2016, a year after Bloodborne and 3 years before Sekiro. I'm hoping to get a proper sequel for Dark Souls, but that's not what we got. We got Dark Souls 3, which is a mix of Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2. It starts off in the Cemetery of Ash, an actual tutorial area and tutorial boss. Then you go to the Firelink Shrine again, and look what they did to my boy. They made it a hub area. Here you have a blacksmith, some vendors, and your fair maiden holding up progress yet again. These maidens, I swear. Once again, it's a linear game, so this is not helpful to the structure of the game. They really like these maidens. The Firelink Shrine was an area in the first game to help you progress through the story. It was a meeting place for the important NPCs you meet along your journey. They come here for a rest. Maybe you could get some info. Or they sell you a couple items, but even they don't stick around, and the game doesn't want you to stick around either. The area is here for you to touch base every once in a while, see what's going on in the world, and move on with your life. Again, this is great for the structure. Think of Dark Souls 1 Firelink Shrine like Samus' ship in Super Metroid. You go there, restock, and move on. Firelink Shrine at Dark Souls 3 serves its purpose, I guess. They streamline all the blacksmiths down to Andre, and they keep most of the vendors you find here for you to visit. This is great for a game like Demon Souls, but for Dark Souls, it's a hindrance. I don't understand the backwards progress on ideas. Even from a story standpoint, it doesn't make sense. The Firelink Shrine got me hot. From the get-go, I'm not fucking with these backwards ideas. But I digress. Once you talk to the Firekeeper and activate the bonfire, you have to use the teleport ability to get to the first area. This shit grinds my gears. After getting spit roasted by Smough and Ornstein for hours, you finally get the Lord Vessel in DS1. That is the most accomplished I've ever felt in a Dark Souls game. When you earn the ability to teleport to most of the bonfires, you are also greeted with the most voluptuous maiden in the Dark Souls series. So it's a 2-for-1, and you get to come back here anytime you want to praise the sun. Nah, Dark Souls 3 is like, here you go. Now go out there and beat somebody. Now we out here at the High Wall Lothric, and it's business as usual to the end. Get to a new area, get to the boss of the area, kill boss, rinse, repeat. If you like the game loop, you will be here for the ride. Again, it's a linear game, so you just go from point A to point B. Nothing crazy here. You got cool bosses and a nice setting, but that's really it. The gameplay is still Dark Souls with a few more animations. Some of it looks good, but that doesn't make good combat. So Dark Souls 3 isn't really doing anything special. With the games that came out in 2016, I put it smack dab in the middle. Some of those games like Stardew Valley and No Man's Sky are still getting updates to this day, making them even better than the day they came out. You got those games that unlocked the formula and went on a crazy run like Doom, Hitman, and Persona 5. Those hidden gems like Watch Dogs 2, XCOM 2, and Inside popped out to show them that year. You got that game no one appreciated at the time and wish it would come back into their lives like that X, Titanfall 2. Now it's time to show my bias, like I haven't been doing that this whole time. One of my favorite games came out this year, Dying Light. I'm not even gonna get started, because this is a video about shitting on Dark Souls, and I don't even have the time. Just know I love that game. This is kind of to my next point I'm gonna make. All these games are coming out in just that year, and they all have their own identities. All of them have their own playstyles, mechanics, and aesthetics. But if you listen to all these game journalists, listen to these players and streamers, you would think all these games are Dark Souls. It's like they can't fucking help themselves, but compare everything they play to Dark Souls. Here we go. The real reason I wanted to make this video. Write this script. Yell in this mic. Number 5. Everything isn't Dark Souls. Miyazaki can't even make another Dark Souls, but these buffoons who influence the gaming space keep thinking that when there is a roll button and a health meter with a boss name attached to it, it's Dark Souls. This is getting ridiculous, honestly out of hand. I've been put off of certain games because I hear the game is like Dark Souls, but it has nothing in common with it at all. One game I didn't want anything to do with because of the comparison was Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. This is a really good game, has a great comprehensible and easy to follow story, has fun combat with different tools to utilize. They give you the ability to customize your lightsaber, and oh yeah, you also get to use the Force. Now what part of this sounds like Dark Souls? I'm waiting. I don't understand how you're supposed to inform the gaming world about these new exciting games and all you can do is compare it to something that came out in 2011. It's just egregious. It doesn't give these other games the proper respect. Dark Souls is said to be this hard, painstaking game. When I hear the comparisons, personally, I'm turned off. Not because of the difficulty of the game, but because of what I described in the last 4 sections. The Dark Souls series is okay, so I immediately think the game is being hyped for more than what it is. I think the combat is ass and it's a linear game. These are my first thoughts as soon as I hear the comparisons. I'm sure other people hear these comparisons and think they're in for this difficult time, and they don't want that. Either way, these people are catering to a niche audience with the sales number to prove this. The Dark Souls series is looking at about 35 million total, which is great because most people and companies can't sell 2 of anything, let alone 35 million. You know there's a but coming. This is after 13 years, 3 games, 7 different versions, 4 different consoles, and some of you buying the game multiple times. The all-beloved Elden Ring sold around 25 million after 2 years. Again, these are great numbers for anything to sell, but it allows me to put how niche this series is in perspective. I really don't even have to compare it to these legacy games like Minecraft, was sold over 300 million, has been out as long as Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls had a month head start and another game it was following up from, but you know, greatest game ever. There's no need to compare it to Grand Theft Auto 5, which has sold over 200 million and came out 2 years after Dark Souls 1. No, let's just go back 1 year. Hogwarts Legacy came out 1 year ago. There was apparently a boycott against JK, and still Hogwarts Legacy is one of the top 50 best-selling games of all time, and it's not 50. It sold more than Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which sold over 20 million on the Switch, which is insane, by the way. It also sold more than Call of Duty that year. Okay, am I starting to make my point? Nobody is striving to beat Dark Souls. That shit don't sell. These companies out here looking for these Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty sales. I'm sure when Respawn was making Fallen Order, the games in the back of their minds were Metroid, a great game series called Jedi Knight, and a little bit of Doom 2016 sprinkled in for good measure. I'm sure when Fortnite was a tower defense game, they weren't looking at FromSoft on how to succeed. Trust me, the next big game won't be a Dark Souls clone. But if you leave it to these gaming outlets, they are going to find some way to tie it to Dark Souls somehow. They were even saying Rise of the Ronin was a Souls-like. How? The game is clearly inspired by Assassin's Creed, or even more recently Ghost of Tsushima. It's like they have Dark Souls brain rot or something. It's like they don't play games or something. 52 trillion games and the only game they can think of is Dark Souls. I love video games. It's a legit passion for me. I myself am guilty of being caught in a stranglehold by certain games. But that passion does not blind me and make me believe that every game with an Azuna drop is Ninja Gaiden. I honestly do not understand what has these people so mesmerized by these mediocre games. I understand the love for Dark Souls 1. I'm just at a loss, honestly. I don't get the hype for anything beyond or before Dark Souls 1. I can't speak on Elden Ring because I haven't played the game enough, but from what I played, it was screaming Breath of the Wild. That game is the reason I bought a Switch, but I'm cool on playing the version with Dark Souls combat. I can't stress enough how bad that combat is. I also can't stress enough that these Dark Souls comparisons are hurting some of these games' identities and sometimes sales, because again, It took me 5 years to play Fallen Order. Look, I don't want to call these outlets lazy, but they need to help these games get their own identities, help shape the gaming landscape, and let everyone know how vast gaming ideas are. Dark Souls is not the end-all be-all, and that's okay. Number 6. It's okay everything isn't Dark Souls. These games have their own identities. Yes, Stardew Valley is inspired by Animal Crossing, just like Elden Ring is inspired by Breath of the Wild. But even these games have their own identities. We have at least 50 years of games that these developers have played and loved and want to show that with the games they make. Sorry to all the Call of Duty developers. They get to show how they were inspired by the games or hobbies before them and innovate on ideas that stick with us throughout time. We remember those games fondly, and when something comes out that reminds us of that experience, we want to try the new game. Games have been building on these ideas all this time, and for these outlets comparing them to Dark Souls is a disservice. Yes, there are these games that jump on trends and try to capitalize like God of War or Fortnite, but there are these other games that broke through what inspired them and became their own. If people thought Saints Row was just a GTA clone, we wouldn't have got Saints Row 2. That's when it broke out and became Saints Row and a household name. How are these games able to break out if all they are getting called is Dark Souls clones, Souls-likes, Soulsborns? Again, it's just lazy. It's easier to copy the smart kid's homework than to figure it out on your own. Here, I'll give some solutions instead of just complaining. About this for the start. Describe the game. Say what's going on during the gameplay. Tell people the mechanics of the game. How long is the game? Specs for your PC. If the game is co-op. That seems like work though. It's just easier to say, oh, it has a save point, it's a Souls-like. Oh, it's in feudal Japan, it's a Sekiro. Somebody has a top hat, it's a Bloodborne. How does this help the actual game become more than what it is? How does that spread the different ideas these games have and want to share with people? It doesn't. It puts everything in a box, and if it doesn't fit in that box, it isn't worth a damn. Honestly, it's just weird. Just like the Dark Souls community. Number 7, the Dark Souls community is weird. Fans of Dark Souls are the reason I have such a disdain for this franchise. They prop these games up to be more than what they are. And if you don't like it, you are crazy or something is wrong with you. Look, let's start with this. Fans have no clue why they like Dark Souls as a franchise. So many of you have attached your love of the game to a mechanic, a boss you fought, a zone you get to be in, or for some reason, the combat. But none of you like these as a whole. You don't like the full experience that is Dark Souls. Fans of Dark Souls have become these gatekeepers that seem to have lost the plot and the passion for the novel. Instead of being gatekeepers of lore, story, or knowledge of the series, they decide to tell people it's the most beautiful and difficult game that was ever made, ever. They spew nonsense about how being good at Dark Souls means to not use the tools that Miyazaki himself gave you. If you even think about playing the game how you would like to play it, if it's not to their standards, they say you aren't good or you had an easy playthrough. They tell you that it's the most beautiful and vibrant game ever created by man. Everything that you ever see is the most creative asset in a video game you will ever witness. It's not that serious. Dark Souls has a great art direction, but then that shit is smeared with doo-doo and cocoa butter. Every asset had to get put through the Vaseline factory before getting put on screen. The Last Giant exists. He looks like he would be the main attraction at a Diddy party or Hero Gasm. Art is subjective, and that's what makes their takes so weird. They want Dark Souls to be this subjectively loved franchise that every gamer needs to play in order to consider themselves a hardcore gamer. There is no room for nuance or disagreement from others in the community. The gatekeepers want you to think that Dark Souls is difficult. They want you to think that the game provides this hardcore, action-packed, heart-throbbing experience that's going to test your hand-eye coordination to their very limits. They hype these encounters so when they finally win, they get to hype up these things as accomplishments. Since it takes them fighting a boss 42 times before they win, they wanted to make it seem like they overcame this mountain. Most of the time, it's them putting their own rules and standards on the game, not using certain weapons or certain techniques, and seeing if they could bull rush their way through a boss or a section. And again, after 54 attempts, they want you to call it skill. I'm not mad at them putting their own rules into play. Things like a Nuzlocke exist, and sometimes make the game a little more fun and interesting. Also, something everybody came to agree upon. There are certain rules you abide when doing a Nuzlocke. The community doesn't do this. They insert their own challenges to put down your experience and gameplay to make their own seem superior. If you use the weapons or tools that the man Miyazaki himself put in the game, you are not good at the game that Miyazaki made. The Dark Souls community has become unironic trolls. They spew nonsense about how other games don't stand up to the standard of Dark Souls. From what I witnessed, there's a process that goes with this. First, the game is previewed at some electronic event. A nice shiny trailer comes out to show off some gameplay, and that's when it begins. They look for three main things to start the comparison. The game has a role feature, the UI has a particular look, or if they see a boss with a health bar, it's over. That game is automatically Dark Souls. The game could be linear, has Devil May Cry mechanics, and a simple story that's easy to follow. But since they saw those three things, the game is Dark Souls. Second, the game then comes out and it's nothing like Dark Souls. That's when the community starts to come and tell you their opinion about how the game is not Dark Souls, therefore it is inferior. They find minuscule reasons to complain about and review bomb other games to lower user score. They take the time out of their day to go and make mods to try to make the other games more like Dark Souls. The community does what it can to devalue other games that isn't Dark Souls. And when I say Dark Souls, I mean the first game, not the franchise. The community has been wanting that first Dark Souls like a fiend. I say this because the tactics the community uses on other franchises, they do the same thing to other games that are in the same franchise. They say it's good, but it isn't Dark Souls. They even mod the mechanics and systems from DS1 to the other games. The community hypes up how superior they are in playing the game. I think Miyazaki heard all this also because when Shadow of the Erdtree comes out, he ups the difficulty. He turned it up so much that the same community that tells everyone else that they are gaming gods cried that the DLC was too difficult. They even went to go review bomb the DLC to make the user score mix. The community realized they were making themselves look bad, so they went and changed their reviews and added more to change the score to mostly positive. As I'm writing this right now, the recent reviews are mixed. Much like this community is. They are suffering from brain rot. The community is actually mad at Miyazaki about the fact that he just won't make Dark Souls 1 again. You have your Sekiro fans and Bloodborne fans as well, but they are mad too. Miyazaki won't come out with a sequel to either one of these games. Bloodborne fans just want that damn thing on PC. The community is frustrated because they got this euphoric experience that first time and they haven't found anything to replicate that experience. So they go to the other developers to try and find that same fix and they don't get it. I think this is what makes them lash out on other games and franchises. The other games developers show them a couple things that remind them of these experiences, and in their opinion, it doesn't live up to their expectations. This makes the game not good for them, and therefore not worth their or anyone else's time. And they'll make sure to tell everyone and anyone that will listen. What I just described is a fiend, a certain type of fiend, but I think I made my point, so I'm not going to say too much more on that. This behavior is what makes me frustrated with the community. The way they go out there and devalue other games and others' experiences is lame. Simple as that. Hopefully what I'm saying will help by putting a mirror on their actions and making them reflect on their decisions. I'm bullshitting. I know this ain't gonna change anything. Just wanted this out in the ether.
And every time you think my 15 minutes of fame are up, I spit another 16 and prove to the world I fucking own it.
To close this out, I want to say there is nothing wrong with liking the Dark Souls franchise. FromSoft has made decent to really good games. I will even admit that Dark Souls 1 is a god tier game. But my love for that one game does not stop me from enjoying and loving others. From my personal experience, Neo made me better at Dark Souls. I don't hold that against Dark Souls though. I get that it's some people's favorite franchise, but understand that it is a really niche thing. Yes, Elden Ring sold 23 million units the year it came out, and it won Game of the Year at the Game of the Year award. All that hype, all that praise, and with all that acclaim, it didn't sell more than Hogwarts Legacy. Yes, it came out a year later, but even with a boycott against J.K. Rowling and all things Harry Potter, the game went on to sell 24 million units in a year, 12 million units in a week. And I know that Elden Ring has sold more now, but that's after being out for 2 years and dropping a $40 DLC. Just putting things into context. Again, hopefully I did that successfully today. My plan wasn't to tear down and devalue Dark Souls as a game or a franchise. I just wanted to tell some of y'all fans out there,
You're fucking crazy.
Ain't been about critics, not about gimmicks, not about who the greatest is. It's always been about love and hate. Now let me say I'm the biggest hater. I hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk. I hate the way that you dress.